Welcome to Irwin Data Modeler Tool Training. In this course, entitled Refining Your Irwin Data Model, we will improve on a simple data model beyond mere boxes and lines. We will explore custom metadata and learn how attention to visual design can improve understanding and usability of our models. This course is one of a series of tool training courses meant to get you up to speed quickly with Irwin Data Modeler. In this course, we will begin with an Irwin DM model, one which we've developed in earlier courses. Our work will be to enhance the model, both its appearance and its functionality. Let's begin with a few new wrinkles on navigating the Irwin DM model. None of the things we will discuss are mandatory for you to use, but the go-to dialog comes close. We have seen the overview pane before in an earlier course, but this time let's dig a little deeper. As Irwin installs, the overview pane is in the bottom right corner of the interface. Remember that it shows the currently visible, the currently displayed section of the current diagram. Notice what we see in the workspace and how it corresponds to the blue rectangle in the overview pane. Kind of tiny down there. Let me undock the overview pane. And now it's even smaller, but I can resize the overview pane once I've undocked it. Now what we're going to be doing with the overview pane here applies to all these panes. So they have similar behaviors, but they do slightly different jobs. Now you can easily see that the blue highlight, the rectangle in the overview pane, corresponds to what we're looking at currently in the diagram. If I grab that blue highlight and move it around the diagram, the workspace changes correspondingly. So if we're working through a keyhole here, the blue rectangle in the overview pane is the keyhole. Now we have enlarged the overview pane when I undocked it. Let me redock it quickly back to the same place that it came from by pointing at the title bar and giving a double click, and it's back in place. If I undock again, notice that the overview pane remembers the size it was when I sent it back to its dock, and this rectangle of visibility has not moved. In addition to moving the rectangle of visibility, I can grab one of the corners handles. Not every corner has a handle right here, but if I move it down, I can see every corner does have a handle. Let me grab one of those handles and I can resize. Now the resizing is going to be proportional here. So we're going to maintain the same aspect ratio. So we can use the overview pane, and especially this rectangle of visibility, to help us pick what we want to see, what we want to display from the current diagram in the workspace and the zoom level. Well, what if I don't want to redock it where I brought it out of? What if I want to dock the overview pane over here on the right? We said way back in the first course how customizable the Irwin interface is. Well, okay, let's put it to the test. If I highlight and select on the title bar for the overview pane, you might notice around the diagram we see icons, some lonely icons and some sets of icons. There's a set of 4 in the middle of the diagram or of the workspace. And there's one at the top. And there's one at the right side. Notice if I drag my workspace around and manage to hover my mouse cursor over one of these blocks, watch what happens. One of these icons. See how that blue shadow popped up? I'm hovering over the icon, the lonely icon way out here to the right side. If I were to release the mouse button, the left mouse button right now, the overview pane would dock right where that blue highlight is. Another option is to dock at the top. This cluster of 4 buttons, 4 icons in the middle, top, left, bottom, and right. Way, 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 way down at the bottom, down below the diagram display, down in the docking area, in fact, I see another docking button. And now, in fact, when I'm down in that region, to the right, I see a set of 4 docking buttons. Every one of these gives me a different location. And that location right there corresponds to the original location of the overview pane. Just for fun, I'm going to dock the overview pane here on the right side of the diagram. Click, and there it is. If I undock it now and double click on the title bar to redock, it's going back to redock in its most recently docked position. Well, what if I want to put it back where I got it? Well, I have to maneuver and manipulate a little bit. I get down in here to the bottom section, and then I have to choose a button that's going to give me left, right, or center. Well, none of those does it. So let's try again. There we go. If I want to put it back in its original position, there, from that bottom right corner set of 4 buttons, I want to release on the rightmost button. And there we have the overview pane back. So this docking and undocking and redocking behavior is going to be the same for all these other panes. So that's some additional information about the overview pane, how we can use it to control what's displayed on the screen in the workspace, and how we can undock, redock, or dock in some new place, the overview pane, or any of the other panes. Our use of zoom in Irwin Data Modeler has been limited to the toolbar and a brief mention of the slider at the right end of the status bar. Of course, there is more. Now let's take a little deeper look at zoom within Irwin Data Modeler. Many people's first choice for zooming is to hold down the control key on the keyboard and then to move the mouse's scroll wheel up or down. Gives you a very controllable zoom. It doesn't allow you to reposition while we're zooming as we can do with the overview pane. Notice with each step as we go, the bottom right corner you can see we're moving 10% steps. Of course, Irwin Data Modeler has a zoom toolbar, and ours is docked toward the left end of the second row of toolbars. Let's just go through them, just click through them one at a time. The zoom out button, that's the magnifying glass with a little minus sign inside. Have you noticed the status bar at the bottom right corner of the screen? Every time we click, we're moving in about 10% increments. The second button from the left in the zoom toolbar is zoom in. It's a magnifying glass with a plus sign in it. So as we zoom in, we're starting at 51%, 61, 71, 81. Then the magnifying glass with the equal sign in it is called zoom normal. Click on that. All normal means is 100%. The fourth button from the left in the zoom toolbar is zoom to fit model. Right now we're at 100%. Let's click on that. Now we haven't fit the whole model, but we have fit our diagram into the workspace. The fifth button from the left and our final one is zoom to fit selection. So we see a magnifying glass inside a lasso box. Let's click on that. Nothing happens. Well, what if we build a lasso box first and then zoom? And you see it zooms in to fit the section that we had lassoed. So those are the buttons in the zoom toolbar. Let me zoom to fit. The view menu also has zoom settings, and they correspond to zoom in, zoom out, the same as we had on the toolbar. Except there's another gadget called Zoom Tool. This gives us a magnifying glass with an up and downward pointing arrow. And if we press and drag the mouse around, if we're going in a generally downward direction, even diagonally downward, we're zooming in. Go in some general direction of upward, we're zooming out. Finally, let's take another look at the zoom tool at the right end of the status bar, way down here in the bottom right corner. We have the slider in the middle of the tool, and we can bump it up or down. In theory, you should be able to control this down to individual percentages, but boy, that takes a really fine touch with your mouse. Notice at the ends of the slider, we have a minus button. Click on it, and we zoom out in 10% steps. And a plus button at the right end of the slider, we zoom out. Also, the percentage indicator is a button. So where it now says 100%, if I click on that, I can choose 25, 50, 75. So this allows me to jump in larger increments. Fit model is a choice here, but that's some zooming techniques and options in Irwin Data Modeler. The Go-To dialog has been a terrific feature of Irwin Data Modeler for many versions. However, it always seems to go just below the surface to those users who haven't had formal training. In recent releases of the tool, the Go-To dialog is a very powerful navigation ally. Now we're going to learn a really fun way to move around the diagram. It's not a very big deal when you have only a few tables or a few entities as we have in our model right now. But as you know, serious models easily go upwards of 100 or several hundred entities. So it's extremely handy to be able to find exactly what we're looking for. So how can we move around in here? From the edit menu, way down at the bottom, we get a hint. Go to, let's pop that up. Now I am zoomed out in our workspace so that you see the entire diagram here. Gives us a list of tables, views. The views are down at the bottom just because of their names. Alphabetical order is what's working here. And a bunch of foreign key constraints, or as we'd call them, a logical model, relationships. So let's just use it right now. Let's see what happens if we say go to book. Click on book, and now in the buttons at the bottom right, push go to. You might notice that the diagram repositioned itself in our display and that book is selected. Let's use the hotkey combination now, Control G to pop up go to. And let's look for the discount table. I can see discount is peeking its head at just out here at the bottom. Select discount and go to. Now since we picked discount, it's appearing about in the middle of our screen. Once again, Control G. And we'll show you a different way of doing this now. I want to look for the purchase order table. Well, this might be a very long list. In fact, I might have lots and lots and lots and lots of relationships and all kinds of stuff here. I'd like to be able to filter. And in Irwin, filter means filter to include. Not all, not everything, but just tables. So I'm going to set the filter type to table. So the only thing will be displayed now are tables. But it does show the entire diagram. I see purchase order down here, so let me begin to enter filter text P. Aha! Notice what happens. U, R. We have that soft select behavior. I'm just going to double click on the purchase order table in the list, highlighted in the center of the screen. Let's take another look at Control G, our go-to. The go-to dialog is resizable, as just about everything in Irwin is. In fact, the columns are resizable. Let's close this for a moment and switch from the physical side of our model over to the logical side. Drop down the list of filter types. We just see entity and relationship. There is a checkbox at the top right to show drawing objects. We don't have any drawing objects in our diagram. That's coming up, but you can search for drawing objects. And of course, we have some tool buttons. The first button allows us to sort several ways, alphabetic or reverse alphabetic, or alphabetic by owner and name. The second button, choose name display format. Let's see what our choices are here. Logical names, physical names. Even though we're on the logical side of the model, I could select to see the physical names. So the button changes pictures depending on the setting you have chosen. Override theme style settings. That would allow us to apply these theme style settings to things that we were finding. The fourth button, how handy it is to be able to do this soft select and then to jump to the properties editor for it right there. The fifth button and final button is a help key. It's also extremely handy to be able to find things other than entities. I'm going to go to the book is tracked by. It's a relationship between book and book YTD sales. Go to. And that relationship line is highlighted. Okay, Control G. I hope you find it extremely useful. Now you know some of the inside tips and tricks for navigating your Irwin DM model. Of course, you don't need to use all of them all of the time, just when they make you more productive. Even people who are used to working with data models all the time are often bewildered by a model that is brand new to them. Irwin Data Modeler has capabilities that can help users get up to speed rapidly with a new model or with changes to a model that they thought they knew. Diagrams are usually meant to enhance communications between humans. Still, an Irwin DM diagram may have dozens or hundreds of model objects. Anything that we can do to improve and hasten understanding benefits the modeler and the model consumers. The ability to add notes and drawing objects, such as callouts, is one way to speed understanding of an Irwin DM diagram. In Irwin Data Modeler, drawing objects exist at the diagram level. From the View menu, toolbars, we want to make sure that the Drawing toolbar is turned on. The Drawing toolbar is the one that I have here at the top right corner. It has all different kinds of shapes on it, something I call a polyline. They just highlight it as a line. And Connector, we're going to take a look at Connector also. I'm going to select an ellipse. This is the third button from the left. And let me lasso a space about like this. You see how that sizes, positions, and in fact shapes the ellipse. Once the ellipse is there, if I click on the ellipse, I get these little handles, or grips as they're called in Irwin DM, around the sides. I can use those to resize and reshape. Grabbing a grip on a corner lets me resize in both vertical and horizontal dimensions at the same time. Now, this is something that can throw you off. Right-click on the drawing object, and notice, as you find in PowerPoint, for example, we have bring forward and send backward. Well, let me send all the way back. You notice something? The relationship lines are obscured by the drawing object. Notice the tooltip that pops up. This is shape 824. I'm going to open up the Diagram Properties Editor by right-clicking the background and picking Properties. On the Display tab, all the way down at the bottom, Preferences, Display Lines on Top. But let's check that box and close our Diagram Editor. There we go. Now that setting is for this diagram only. So now we have our relationship line showing on top of the drawing object. Let's look at another drawing object, this connector. I'll click that button in the drawing toolbar. I'm going to click first on my drawing object. Remember, we don't drag and drop these lines. We click once to launch the line and again to drop the line. I'm going to click on Publisher. And now we have a line. These lines behave very much like the relationship lines. We can reshape them. We can just do all kinds of things with them. And like relationship lines, the connector connects. It actually connects. So if I grab hold of my ellipse and move it to the left, notice the connector does not move. If I move my ellipse way back to the right, the connector does not move. So connectors are very handy. Be careful when you're using connectors and rectangular drawing objects, because you can very quickly wind up with something that looks like a pair of entities or tables, and it's not. Let me double click on this drawing object, our ellipse. ER diagram, logical shape. This is a shape editor. Logical refers to the name of the diagram that we're on. This is shape 824, the ellipse. Shape 825 is our line. But let's keep on shape 824 for a minute. Notice the tabs at the bottom. The first tab, the leftmost, is text. I'm going to type some text here. I want to call out several of these entities, the ones that I'm surrounding with the ellipse and also the one that I've connected with the connector, for consideration in another subject area. Notice there's a definition, where used. I can't modify all of the properties of that drawing object here. For example, I can't change the fill color. Let me close the editor. Once again, make sure that the drawing object, the ellipse, is selected. Right-click it, Override fonts and colors. Here in the shape editor, this is a different shape editor, but this is the override fonts and colors shape editor. We have two tabs, style and annotation or shape. Notice one of the choices here is text handling style, also horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. Let me change the font options on my annotation shape tab, pushing the A button to the right there and dropping down the size selector. Let me jump up to about 20 point. Close. Also, I'm going to change vertical alignment. This is inherited, but you see the font option up above, that little icon with the pencil now means we've overridden the inheritance just for this object. Vertical alignment, drop down my selector and pick center. You scoot this off to the side and you can see that as soon as we make the choice, it shows up out in the diagram. Notice for fill options, line options, and outline options, it says no style specified. Let me go to the style menu. Fill options, line options, outline options, no style specified. Well, there's a style specified by default. These overrides on a style tab are local overrides to the theme. We change the fill settings by pushing a little paint bucket, and I'm going to pick a solid fill style and make my fill color light yellow. Close. On the annotation shape options, we also have fill options. It says no style specified, but when I push the paint bucket, what's going on here? Notice the inheritance button just to the left of the fill options field. Right now, these fill settings are being inherited. But where from? We did that on a style page. So the fill options on the style page are inherited over to the annotation shape page fill options. They can be overridden here. And this is handy when you're using a diagram object in many different places and you just want to have a general design as part of the style, but instance by instance, you may want to change a fill color or a font or a size. Okay, let me close the editor here. We're on the logical diagram in our model subject area. Let me flip to the physical diagram and let me zoom way out. No, that drawing object exists only on the logical tab. So drawing objects are diagram level objects. Select the drawing object and then from the edit menu, pick copy. Now switch to the physical diagram and edit menu, paste. You notice once again that the drawing object is not transparent to the relationship lines. That visibility of the relationship lines is a property of the diagram, and we would have to change that for the physical diagram. Check the box to display lines on top and close. So if you want to get a drawing object in more than one diagram, you can, but you have to copy it and paste it because drawing objects are diagram level objects. They don't exist for the whole model. Okay, well, that's drawing objects. They're very useful for calling out, highlighting some new entities that have been added, some changes that have been made. Now let's take a look at annotation objects. You might notice in the Model Explorer, there's a branch labeled Annotations. I guess I could right-click on Annotations and pick New, but that's a little awkward. Notice in our Irwin toolbox, here we have what looks like a text box, but the tooltip says Annotation. So let me push that annotation and drop a text box up here at the top left. How do I change the color of just one object? I right-click on it. Take a look at Properties. Can't do anything here. Notice that I can, however, change the name. Let me rename this annotation object. I'm going to call it Endpoint Color. I could even change the shape if I wanted. This is the only way I have to change the shape of an annotation. But no, that's good. I don't want any text within this box. So let me close. And now in the Model Explorer under Annotations, I should see Endpoint Color. By the way, from Edit, Go To, annotations are searchable. Drawing objects are searchable too, but to search them, to include them in the Go To, you have to check this box at the top right to show drawing objects. I'll close the Go To box. Right-click on my annotation again, this time override fonts and colors. Remembering the inheritance hierarchy here, I'm going to use the Annotation/Shape tab. And for fill options, select the paint bucket, make my fill style solid, and push the paint bucket for fill color. I'm going to push the other button for other colors because my endpoint color I had saved earlier as a custom color. Well, I need some text to go with my endpoint color, but I'm going to make another annotation box because I want both of these boxes to be part of a legend that is available throughout the entire model. Let me control-click both of those annotations, and from the diagram menu, select Alignment, Align Center. I would like to treat these two annotations as if they were one annotation for many purposes. So I'm going to lasso them, or I could click and control-click, get them both selected, then right-click on either one and pick Group. Now when removing these, we have to be very careful to move the group, because I can grab the text box and move it independently. But if I'm careful, I can highlight that group. And now if I position so that I can grab the group, I can move those two annotations as a group. I need to name that second annotation. So I'm going to right-click it, select Properties. Now we see in the Annotations branch the Model Explorer, Endpoint Text, and Endpoint Color. And with a little bit of work, you'll have a dandy legend. Well, the good news about annotations is you only have to do them once per model. Let's click on the physical diagram. Remember, a set of diagrams is unique to the subject area. But in each diagram, we have to choose which subject area objects we want to present in that diagram. And remember how we do that? Can you visualize the Diagram Properties Editor? Here we go, the Members tab. And notice on the left, I have available for me Endpoint Color and Endpoint Text. So if I select them and move the selected objects over to the right, they show up along with everything else that I have chosen from this subject area to display in this diagram. And let me close. We have a little bit of work to do. This really should not be a big surprise. It's the same result we get if we add entity or table members to a diagram. So how do we avoid having to lay this stuff out again? Well, the same way we would do with entity or table. Instead of just moving it in on the Members tab of the Diagram Editor, we'll use copy and paste. So here we have our little legend up here at the top left corner of the logical diagram. We have to make sure that we select everything, not just the container. So do it that way. And then using the menu from Edit, Copy, and go back to the physical diagram, Edit, Paste. And we get it in the same position on the page that it had in our diagram named Logical. There's the endpoint entity. Let's take a peek for a moment at the Diagram Properties Editor and notice on the Members tab. So copying and pasting of our legend elements, the annotations, from one diagram to another works just the way we would expect it to from having done similar with entities and tables. By now, you're used to arranging model objects in a diagram manually. I recommend especially that you practice manipulating relationship lines manually. It's a skill that only comes with practice. Irwin Data Modeler also has a number of options that will lay out your diagram automatically or semi-automatically. Sometimes these layout options can help you gain new insights about your Irwin data model. Irwin Data Modeler can quickly lay out an entire diagram. We'll see that in the next module of this course. But right now, imagine you're fairly happy with the diagram layout, but you find the positions of some objects need fine-tuning. Let me zoom in a little bit. Open up the Diagram Properties Editor. And on the Layout tab, I have some options at the bottom. Visual cues, and then options in the middle, grid alignment, options at the top, manual layout. These options do kind of interact. Manual layout has to allow for relationship layout and allow for manual entity resizing if we're going to do all that we might want to do manually. We're focusing here on the grid alignment, really. Irwin Data Modeler can display a grid and then allow you to align objects to the grid. And it's got kind of sticky behavior. That's an option to check. I'm going to change that alignment grid. If I zoom in, you'll see it. 5 minor divisions in each major division. Little plus signs used as a grid. I'm going to grab one of the entities here and begin to move it. And it moves. This jerky behavior is not me. That's the grid behavior. Notice that what's aligning is the top edge of the entity box and the left edge of the entity box. It's always clicking, if you will, on the top left corner or on the top edge and the left edge. If you need finer tuning, we need to change the grid size. Open up the Diagram Properties Editor, where it says Alignment Grid Spacing 20. Let's change that to 10 and see what happens to our size. Close this. Oh, there we go. A finer grid, and that gives me finer control. Okay, well, that's align objects to grid. Let me go back in and turn that off. The objects will continue to be aligned however they were aligned. Let's look at the physical diagram here. We'll take a look at our layout capabilities for relationship lines. This relationship line, let me scroll up a little bit more here. Between royalty history and order item, it's got graphical objects at the starting end of that relationship line, but at the end point of it, royalty history, no graphics. We need to have a crow's foot or something here. Look what happens when I select that line. It's actually passing underneath and behind all of these other tables. So what can we do? We can do several things. One of which is we can try to rearrange the relationship lines. Sometimes it's very much worthwhile to untangle our relationship line like that. There's another option that can help. Let me attempt to put this line back in the problem that it was in before. And I'll zoom in. One problem for me is that I cannot tell the relationship line is not connected to these other tables unless I am clicking on the relationship line and moving it. Then it runs above or on top of the intervening tables. We saw something like that when we were working with connectors and with drawing objects. Right-click on the background, select the properties of the diagram, and on the Display tab, this preferences all the way at the bottom of the Display tab, display lines on top. So let's check that box and close the Diagram Properties Editor. And now look what happens. Even if I'm not moving, even if I'm not dragging the relationship line around, I can see it lying on top of Book Author table, the Book YTD Sales table. I can see it cutting across the top of Royalty History table. I don't know, I could make a case for individual modelers who might prefer this option as a default. Diagrams that are more clear visually are much easier to understand. This has been proven with a lot of science. Don't make the reader or the viewer work too hard to get the meaning out. You have taken a couple of steps beyond merely filling your diagram with boxes and lines. Well done. Irwin Data Modeler diagrams communicate visually Therefore, it benefits us all to pay attention to the visual design of our data model diagrams. Done right, we will enhance the communication. In addition to the material covered in Module 2, improving model readability, IrwinDM has other features that can visually enhance our work. The word alignment has several meanings in Irwin Data Modeler. It could refer to straightening relationship lines. It can also refer to semi-automatic adjustment of box positions. It provides a level of detailed control over the layout options that we studied in Module 2 of this course. Use it as you need it. You do not have to apply it to the whole diagram at once. Perhaps you'd like to line up just 2 tables. Alignment is an interesting topic, and it's one that we've talked about a bit, and we're going to talk about it a bit more. There's been a lot of research on the display of information, especially graphical, and on interpretation of charts and diagrams and maps and so forth, that has shown that the neater the appearance of the diagram, the more easily it is understood. So alignment is a very important topic. It's so important a topic in Irwin, in fact, that we have a toolbar for it. It's in the View menu, Toolbars. We've got almost all of them turned on. I'm going to activate the alignment toolbar. It put my alignment toolbar on the first toolbar row all by itself. I'm just going to grab and move it over here. The alignment toolbar. Let's see how this works. Here's a model that we've been working with the last few demonstrations. We're looking at the logical diagram. Take a look at region, store name, and customer entities. Let's lasso region, store name, and customer entities. And from the diagram menu, look at alignment, and you'll see the meanings of all our toolbar buttons. Align left, right, center, align top, bottom, middle, and space vertically and horizontally. We'll play with those later on. So let's now choose align top. So what did we accomplish? We moved region entity and the store name entity so that their tops aligned with the already topmost entity, customer. Let me deselect those. We don't have to lasso these entities. We could just use Control-click. Once again, from diagram, alignment, let's align bottom. Let's see what happens. The bottoms of all the entities now are on the same level. Let me undo that. And now we're going to use the alignment toolbar. There's an align left and align right, but what about align centers and align middle? Well, align centers is a vertical alignment. Click align centers. And once again, we've aligned the centers of these 3 entities to match the center of the region entity because its center was uppermost. Now let's use that toolbar button that we haven't used before. I'm going to select region and publisher, and now the rightmost align middle. Click. Oh, it moved publisher instead of region. So the middle of region was left of the middle of publisher. Therefore, publisher was moved to align with region. While they're both still selected, I'm going to move region and publisher to the right a little bit. But be very careful when you're moving entities. Notice as I move the cursor from out in the diagram where it's just a selection arrow, move it into the entity. When the cursor is positioned over the attributes, I get a little grabber hand. It thinks I want to move an attribute. Let me go up to the top of the entity box where I find the move cursor. So I'm going to grab both region and publisher since they're both highlighted and move them to right a little bit. I guess one more caveat I would have when you're aligning, don't do it too early. Let's zoom in a little bit and get into part of the diagram at the upper left corner just to have a little bit of room to play. We covered drawing objects in a recent module. I'm going to pick out a few drawing objects. How about a rounded rectangle? And then holding down the Control key to remember that trick, I can click and click and click. Get 3 rounded rectangles. Release the Control key. Let me get something that looks quite different now. How about a downward pointing triangle? And finally, how about an octagon? Well, I'm going to choose to align horizontally. I want to align centers. Click. Now I'll pick my next row. And once again, align centers. And finally, the bottom row. I better use Control-click here. Lassoing didn't work so well. And align centers. So now everything's pretty well aligned horizontally, but not very well aligned vertically. Let me go left to right here and align left. How can we improve this spacing? Remember our diagram alignment menu? Down at the bottom we had a couple of alignment choices having to do with spacing. These don't have toolbar buttons. Aha! So it moved the middle item up equally above and below that center object. Well, now let me do something similar in the top row. This time I'm going to adjust the space from diagram alignment, space horizontally, click, and those were almost perfectly set up already. The question is, how do I get these drawing objects at the bottom right corner of my array here? How do I get them to behave? I can use the alignment toolbar for this. Align centers, align centers. Oh, I pushed align middle, and look what happened. Exactly what I should expect. I aligned the middles. They're all stacked on top of each other. Let me undo that. Align center. Those centers are pretty well aligned already. And we didn't have much to lay out. There's only 9 items. I could have turned on the alignment grid and probably done as quickly manually. You don't have to pick all the objects in a column. For example, I can select this top right drawing object and the bottom right drawing object, and I can align their middles. Then I can add the middle drawing object to it and align the middles again. So it's very, very flexible alignment. I wonder if I can align a drawing object with an entity. Select them both and click. Try to predict the outcome of each move that you're going to make, and that will build your skill with alignment. We've seen the layout buttons before. This time, we'll take a little deeper look at using automatic layouts to aid rapid understanding. My layout toolbar is showing in the bottom row of toolbars at the left end. This time we're going to take a little deeper look at using automatic layouts to aid rapid understanding and rapid development. To do this, I'd like to create a new diagram. New diagram, and I want to populate this diagram with everything that's in the subject area, except annotations. So we do that in the diagram editor. I will select all objects, and then these 2 annotations I will push back to the left. And this is what we'll find when we make a new diagram. And let's investigate these automatic layouts now. The leftmost button is circular layout. Let me zoom to fit. I do notice here at the bottom right, that's an interesting result. Also at the top right. Bottom left, I don't know. It doesn't seem to gain anything much from circular. The second layout button is hierarchical. The hierarchical layout will tend to have our starting point entities, remember the ones that have no parents. We'll tend to have them across the top of the diagram and down the left side. It will tend to have the endpoint entities across the bottom of the diagram and up the right side. And what that does is it's not perfect, but it tends to align the relationships from parent to child, top to bottom, and left to right. So that's a hierarchical layout. The third layout button is called orthogonal. And here it's trying to get all the entities or tables laid out either horizontally, vertically, as if they were on a gridded system of streets. And the fourth button, symmetric layout. Sometimes these names don't seem very descriptive, and sometimes they are exactly descriptive. It all depends on the diagram that you're starting with. And the fourth button, tree layout. So for large-scale changes, or especially for a reverse engineering project, sometimes just trying new layouts can produce interesting results, as circular did for us. I like that array of boxes in a circle at the bottom right corner, but this cluster at the top right isn't very satisfying. I'm going to lasso those 4 entities, and now in the layout buttons, Let me try a hierarchical layout and see what happens. It's just the select subset that gets laid out. I might decide I'd like to drag that subset down here a little way. And for the remaining cluster at the bottom left, I think I'll just manually drag it up here like this. I'd go for these subsets a little bit. But you know what I see? These relationship lines, a lot of them are really messed up. Got bends in them that I would just as soon not have. Remember, every bend that the eye has to follow slows down understanding. We've seen before that by positioning our cursor above a relationship line and giving a right click, we can reset that one relationship's path and straighten everything out. Wouldn't it be nice if we could reset all of the lines in the diagram without moving any of the boxes? In fact, we can do that. From the Edit menu under Selection, I see that we do have the Windows standard Control-A to select all. Let me try Control-A. And now in our layout buttons, the fifth button from the left, I call it the motorcycle button. It's got a big spinning rear wheel on it here. And the tooltip says Reset Relationship Paths. Click on that button. Wow, very nice. I still see a couple of things that need a little manual assistance, but that's pretty much it. Well, what about that invert selection? Remember initially when we tried that circular layout and I decided, well, circular layout's not very pleasing. I'd like to lay out everything except that circular piece at the bottom right corner. So I'll select the circular piece. Now these other pieces, I might have a big diagram. I could have chunks of things all over the place. So from the Edit menu, Selection, Invert Selection. Now everything that wasn't selected before is selected. And I can try some hierarchical layout. Maybe, except it's kind of tangled. Let me move things over. That's not half bad. So you see a combination of a little manual work and a little automatic work. Very interesting. I noticed another selection. Edit Selection. It's grayed out right now. Select Neighborhood. What does that mean? Select Neighborhood. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'll select Author. And now Edit, Selection. Select Neighborhood is bright, so I can click it now. What gets selected? Neighborhood here doesn't mean just everything that's nearby. It means parents and children. Ah, like neighborhood in a subject area. Yes. Let me clear that selection, and this time I'll start with Order Item. Order Item has one or more parents and one or more children. So now let's Edit, Selection, Select Neighborhood. So just the original selection, which was Order Item, that entity, all of its parents and all of its children. Sometimes when we're exploring, we can see some issues. Notice this relationship line that begins at Book actually passes behind Author and ends at Order Item. We have a choice of ways to handle that. There's also a relationship line that begins at Book and ends at Book Author and just passes beneath the corner of Author. Let me grab Author and Book Author, move them both down a little bit, and move Author over to the right a little bit and uncover that relationship line. Okay, but I've got some messed up relationship lines again. For example, there's a relationship line that begins at Purchase Order and ends at Order Item, passes behind Customer. Let's try that motorcycle button again. Control-A to select all and motorcycle button. And yes, those relationship lines, if they have a place to go, if everyone can find a place to route them, it will. So we've explored the different automatic layout arrangements. We've seen how to apply them to the whole diagram. We've seen how to apply them to a subset of the entities and tables in the diagram. We've seen how to lay out different subsets of the diagram according to different layout options. And we've seen how to use the motorcycle button in our layout options to straighten up crooked or kind of misguided, misdirected relationship lines. All that with a very limited set of tools. So there's a lot of opportunities for making sense of your diagrams. In earlier courses, we have used styles and inheritable themes to control fonts and colors throughout a diagram and a data model. Sometimes our objectives are much smaller. We may just want to change the appearance of one item. Some concepts in Irwin Data Modeler, even if they're not complicated concepts, there's a lot to them because they can be applied on so many different levels. So we're going to take another look at fonts and colors. Here we are on a physical diagram and just double checking in our display toggle up in the toolbar. We're looking at the physical side of the model. Remember, this is not locked to the name of the diagram. I could just as easily be looking at the logical side of the model on a diagram labeled physical. But I want to be on the physical side here. I'm going to add an audit column to our publisher table. And so that I can have full control of it, I'm going to use the column properties editor. Remember, if I do on-screen editing, all I have control over is the name. And I want to control the data type as well as the name. And I also want to control the appearance. So in the table editor, let me select the new button at the top and we'll make a new, not a new table, but a new column. It's automatically named default. You can see it in the diagram. So I'm going to change it to, let's say publisher, latest update, date, time. Being very verbose here, even with physical names, because we want it to be quickly and easily understood. Domain parent. Right now I'm just going to select the date, time. Notice that assigns the physical data type of date, time. On the Style tab at the bottom, I'm going to change the appearance of this column by clicking on the bold checkbox. And notice my little inheritance button. It shows that I have overridden the inheritance. And close. Pointing the cursor into the part of the table below the table name, I get this grabber hand. I can use it to select or click select or shift select one or more columns. And when I have that selected, I can use the font and color toolbar to change the color of that text. Well, let's go with some purple on green. So I have overridden the bold option. I did that in the column editor. And using the font and color toolbar, I've overridden the color for this audit column. It occurs to me that author also needs an audit column. So I could reproduce all of this work, but why do that? Maybe there's an easy way. So click in the publisher table, select again, publisher latest update date time. Hold down the control key. We're going to do the Windows copy drag and position that horizontal insert bar at the bottom of the author table. Release it. We have made a copy of publisher latest update date time. Well, that's not what I really want. What I want is author latest update date time. All I want to do is change the name. Maybe I could change that right here in on-screen editing. So I select the author table, use the grabber cursor then to select my publisher latest update date time. Give one more click. I'll remove publisher, type in author, and we'll leave it. I'm trying to make a bigger point here. Let me take a look at the columns for author. Let me resize my editor a little bit, and you can see the full name of that column. Notice the date, time, domain parent. Well, that's come right along with the copying, as has the physical data type, as has, on our Style tab, the bold option. And of course, the purple color that I got, and it's also been overridden. As has bold been overridden. Close. But if I had reusable columns and attributes, that would be very, very handy. That's a subject we will soon take up. Display levels are a terrific way to tailor a diagram quickly to a specific audience, or for a specific purpose, or at some particular time in the development and review of a model. We're going to use the concept of display levels to help prepare for diagrams that might be intermediate deliverables or final deliverables for your logical modeling project. These display levels have their corresponding appearance and behavior on the physical side. First of all, I'm going to make some new diagrams. They're going to be based upon my logical diagram. From the diagram menu, I'll select a new diagram, and may as well do it 4 times. I think I'll position the old physical diagram way off to the right by just grabbing the tab and moving it all the way to the right. Go to my first new diagram. It's labeled in my system ER diagram 878, and open up diagram properties. We have no members right now, but remember, if we populate the desired entities into the diagram this way, they're just going to be a jumble because the layout doesn't come with the entities, the relationships, and the annotations. If we want to make sure we use the same or similar layout as on our logical tab, we'll have to go to the logical tab, Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then go to this first diagram tab and Control V to paste. That makes sure we get the same layout. While we're at it, let's just go to each successive diagram, Control V, and Control V. Now let's return to our leftmost new diagram, and I want to rename this diagram. In fact, while I'm here, we have a list at the top, so I can open this editor and now work on other diagrams, not just the one that I launched the editor from. This diagram is going to be entitled ERD. That stands for Entity Relationship Diagram. The second diagram, definitions. The third diagram, KBDM, Key-Based Data Model. And finally, FADM, Fully Attributed Data Model. So you can kind of see the ERD is just going to show entity boxes with the names inside and relationship lines. So that'd be a very early deliverable in a logical modeling development. On the definitions diagram, I'm going to show entities in boxes, but the name will be above the box, and inside the box will appear the definition that we have for that entity. KBDM, Key-Based Data Model. Here we're going to have a box for each entity, the entity name above the box, and inside the box, just the names of keys, key attributes. FADM, Fully Attributed Data Model, is going to be the entity and all its attributes in all their glory. Okay, close. Here's our ERD, Entity Relationship Diagram. Now, the question is, do we have a really quick way to display entities on a logical diagram as boxes with their names inside the box, no mention of any attributes? On the View menu, under Display Level, we have Entity, Attribute, Primary Key, Keys, Definitions, and Icon. Notice we have toolbar pictures for all of these except for Icon. And the toolbar that I'm looking at is the one that includes my logical physical dropdown and a toolbar button to launch the subject area editor. The first four buttons on the left are display level buttons. There's our entity display level. Let me click it, and I get a warning. After setting the default display style for the diagram, do you want to remove any existing overrides on objects in the diagram? And we saw from our previous demo what that might mean, where we made the audit column and overrode some properties. I'm just going to answer yes. And here we go. High level indeed. The only real problem I have with this is it sure looks spidery. I think I'm going to use a layout button that we used before, perhaps hierarchical layout. Not bad. Just reposition the entities the way I'd like them to be. And now, how do we straighten out the relationship lines? Edit, Selection, Select All, or Control A. And now use that little motorcycle button. That looks pretty good. And now for fine-tuning the layout, I think these would look a little less jumbled if they were aligned. Align middle. I want to adjust this one relationship line, so right-click on it and reset relationship path. Anything else? Maybe book YTD sales and author. Align them centrally. Order shipment and back order. Align the middles there. Discount order item book return. Align the centers. Publisher, store name, and customer. Align the centers. Looks good. Let me lay out the lines again. Selection, select all. Motorcycle button. Still with one relationship line I don't care for, but I can fix it manually. Well, that's a pretty good looking layout. And with the color coding that we've chosen, the green represents starting points, then the light red represent ending points. On the Definitions tab, in our Layout buttons, the second button from the left is Primary Key, then Attribute Display Level, keys display level, that's multiple keys, and finally definition display level. Select that. Once again, we're going to need a hierarchical layout to get things straightened up a bit. And I'm not going to spend the time to do the final alignment, but you get the idea. A couple of important items about this on the diagram properties editor. The display tab. The second set of options is labeled display length. We have definition and comment display length and view expression display length. That would be a computed column in a view. Definition and comment display length is set to 40. Well, if I wanted to make this a little bit wider, I can set it to 50. If we set that to 0, definition and comment display length, and close, now it's the word wrap that controls the width of the boxes. That's an interesting option. Then go back there and set it to 40 and close. You can control the word wrap just by editing the definitions. And by the way, in definition display level, we can use on-screen editing just by selecting the entity, hit the tab key, and we will be editing the definition for that entity. This is a way to control the word wrapping too. You'll have to enter hard returns if you want to control word wrapping for that situation where you've set the width to 0. KBDM, key-based data model. We have a couple of choices here. Let me zoom to fit again. The second button from the left in our display level buttons is primary key display level. Let's turn that on. Lay it out hierarchically again. And here what you see are all of the attributes that participate in the primary key. You don't see any non-key attributes here. There's another choice, and that is the button that's fourth from the left. It's labeled keys display level, plural keys. Let me select that. A little bit different idea. This looks like the traditional entity display with the attributes listed inside, but these attributes are only the attributes that participate in some kind of key. Primary key, a foreign key, an alternate key, an inversion entry, which is a non-unique key. I think for purposes of early understanding in a logical modeling project, I'll just display the primary keys. Finally, FADM, fully attributed data model. Well, that's what you see here, the attribute display level. Third button from the left, no change. This was already in, this diagram was already in attribute display level. You see a box for each entity, the entity name above the box, and all of the attributes, key and non-key attributes. Well, now you know a good bit about laying out the diagram, controlling the appearance, the level of detail, and so forth for the diagram. An Irwin data model that is correct and complete is a beautiful thing in itself. However, if it is also visually attractive, research shows that the model will be more easily and more correctly understood. Certainly, a vital role of data models is to enhance communications between human beings. In a subsequent course, we will learn how to create user-defined properties, UDPs, to help you track ordinary metadata in your models. For example, review status, or approval date for an entity or table. Or you may want to record in the model the name of the person with ultimate authority over an entity, a table, or even a relationship. However, we frequently have metadata which is unstructured. Perhaps we have a list of complex examples, or even counterexamples, metadata that takes the form of text. Notes and notes extended can include any free-form text, such as sample data and queries. By the way, notes and notes extended are for documentation purposes only at the object level. They do not migrate as comments or definitions do when you derive a physical model from a logical model, or vice versa. Okay, let's start with taking a look at notes for recording unstructured metadata in an Irwin data model. Notes are very handy for capturing unstructured information that's important to the modeler, especially. Extended notes, where you can create your own events, are terrific for tracking unstructured information to share with other people. Notes and extended notes are available for many kinds of model objects. For example, if we check model properties from the model menu, we see notes and extended notes can be created for the model. If we look at a relationship editor, notes and extended notes for the relationships They can also be created for entities and tables, attributes and columns, domains, key groups. Let's see how to build a note, and we'll see a little bit about using them. I'm going to create a new note for the book entity. For the entity book, we've been tasked with creating some audit columns. So right now, this note is going to be just for our own, the modeler's use. On the Notes tab, push the New button. There's a transfer. We'll use that in a little bit. The event, well, every event on the Notes tab is going to be a user note. And now, below, we can enter text. Must have audit columns in place for next tech committee meeting. And as we click on the list above, there, what we've typed in the text box below appears as a comment. Another choice would have been to launch the editor. Remember that little button, that zoom button? And the editor, since this is unstructured text, sometimes you see whole documents entered in here as or copied and pasted. We can save them, print them, search through them, spell check them, all that good stuff. So we have a timestamp, not just the date created, but the date and time created by, date modified, well, it hasn't been modified yet, and modified by. So all that's going to be tracked automatically for our friendly entity level note. And close. Now, let's say that the meeting time is approaching. You'd like to share this information with the members of the technical committee through the web portal, for example, so they can interact, make comments, and you can pick those comments up. So we're going to want to transfer this to the extended notes. I'm going to check the box to transfer. This will be transferable. And now on the Notes tab in the toolbar, we have this little arrow that loops from the left up and to the right. Push that button and our note is gone. It appears as an extended note. And that's the topic we're going to tackle in our next demonstration. Extended notes let you create your own events for unstructured metadata. They are terrific for tracking information you want to share with others. Remember, extended notes let you create your own event, and that makes them terrific for tracking unstructured information that you want to share. Of course, there's no reason that you must share these extended notes, but I just think they kind of promote that. Notes for the individual modeler's use, and extended notes for extended distribution of the note. Remember, at the end of the previous demonstration, talking about notes, we created a note. Must have audit columns in place, apparently for this book entity, for next technical committee meeting. Well, here we are now in the Extended Notes tab. We transferred the note from Notes to Extended Notes, so it's no longer in the Notes tab. It's transferred. It's not copied. It's relocated. But that gives us some new capabilities. Over on the Notes tab, we could not change the name. We now have an event column, an importance column, a note status column. Let's make ourselves a name for this note. Let's rename this as Audit Columns for, and the name of our entity, Book. Now we can have many extended notes down through here, as many as we want. And if you have a controversial entity or one that crosses over a lot of different subject matter experts, you may indeed have a long list. The event. Well, we can create our own events here. How about we create an event called Technical Committee Meeting? We can modify the comment if we want, but we don't want. We could change the author's name. Importance. We have some built-in importances, blank, as opposed to not rated, and then anywhere from 1 star to 5 stars. We're going to give this kind of a medium importance rating with the 3 star. Also, we have an interesting column, Note Status, blank, or candidate, approved, rejected. I'm going to select candidate. We can't really change the modified time. It looks like you can edit that, but we can't. So this can come the other way, too. For example, a subject matter expert could create a comment as an extended note in the web portal and communicate directly with the modeler right in the model. Well, where should you track information related to the model? I think you want to track it in the model. I want the important information about this model in this model. Another thing you might do is track the model's progress through the modeling process by creating an event in Model Properties, as we saw. For example, we could keep track of the model's promotion from test to production status. That bidirectional tracking can come back and forth through the web portal or through meta-model bridges. We're going to take a deeper look at meta-model bridges in the advanced courses, but you can see them from File, Import or Export. Let's look at Import, from External Format. The overview page, and this kind of an interface you're going to see a lot when we get into advanced modeling techniques. The overview page gives you information about what you're about to do. Source, we have a long list of sources outside the Irwin model. Very interesting. Import and export through these metamodel bridges, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will in future courses, would include this unstructured metadata, workflow tracking, notes from a subject matter expert to the modeler, and so forth. This kind of unstructured metadata that we can track with notes and extended notes. Well, there you are. You have now been officially indoctrinated into some very special tracking capabilities of Irwin DM. In Module 5, we will see how the Tools menu can add tremendously to a starting point model, as well as to establish global behaviors for Irwin Data Modeler. The Tools menu gives us many opportunities to build better models, deeper models, models that go far beyond a mere collection of diagrams. Let's look at just a few highlights of some of the very most useful items in the Tools Options dialog. You're familiar with the tooltips that pop up if you let the cursor hover. They're extremely useful, but if you're going to spend the whole week working on 3 or 4 or 5 tables, you might find that the tooltips are getting in the way a bit. So, from the Tools menu, Options, on the General tab, one of our ways of controlling the global behavior of Irwin Data Modeler is down here near the bottom left. In the box labeled Diagram, we have a check for Suppress Diagram Tooltips. I'm going to turn that suppression on. Click OK, and let's try. Let's hover the cursor here over Customer. Nothing. Purchase Order, nothing. Relationship, a foreign key constraint. I'm on the physical side of the model here. No tooltips. Well, let's turn them back on. Tools Options. I'll clear that checkbox to suppress diagram tooltips. On the General tab, we have file locations, default model locations, template locations, transaction log locations. The XML tab gives us control over validation of XML files against the Irwin DM schema. So when we're opening an XML file, we have these 3 choices. Always prompt to validate, always validate, or never validate. The next tab is Diagnostics. Here we can control SQL trace when reverse engineering a model from a system catalog. SQL trace, whether we want to view it, where the trace files are going to be stored, and we have external formatting logs. The next tab, moving left to right, is Reporting. Although we haven't worked on reporting yet in the Irwin Data Modeling Tool training courses, we soon will. Irwin DM can access 2 ODBC data sources. When the driver is active, you can run SQL queries against the current model using the Irwin Data Modeler query tool, which we'll look at here in a little while, or third-party reporting tools, such as Microsoft Excel. Having this ODBC connection lets you specify whether to generate a model activity report when you close the model. By default, that's turned off. This, in essence, is a report based on the action log and where it's going to be stored. Some organizations turn this on for production models. We can also start and stop the ODBC driver for this instance, meaning this model. Oh yes, on the activity summary, remember the action log does not persist. So when you close a model after you've been working on it, that whole action log is dismissed. But if you want a record of what you've done, you can generate an activity summary report by checking this box. And finally, the rightmost tab, MART. Storing models as data in a MART relational database has many benefits. For example, it enables multiple people to be working on the same model at the same time. It also enables merging separate models. This tab in the Tools Options dialog lets you specify default actions for reconciling differences during a merge. We have separate courses on workgroup modeling with MART. And that is it. Yes, Irwin Data Modeler has a spell checker. The first few times you run it, you may be surprised at some words that it doesn't know. You'll find spell check buttons in most of the places that they make sense. For example, in many editors, on the Definition tab, Comment tab, the Notes and Extended Notes tabs, in Notes and Extended Notes tabs of many editors. Oh, what's handy? Book. I like book. I'm going to open the Attribute Properties Editor for the attributes in the entity named book. Book identification. And here on the Definition tab let me highlight this a little better. Book identification attribute. On the Definition tab, we see a definition, a unique identifier for all books we have available for sale in our inventory. Now, I'm going to add something to that. I'm going to type Irwin Data Modeler. And here's the spell check button, ABC with a check mark. Let me click on that. Oh, it tells me there's a capitalization problem, and it's suggesting a capital E. But what I want is lowercase e, and I'd like to get the correct capitalization in here, at least in addition to Irwin. So let me push the Add button at the top right corner of my spell checker. Can't add word to user dictionary. The issue here, I'm trying to add words to the user dictionary, userdic.tlx. Drop down a list, and you see there are a total of 4 dictionaries that we could add words to. Well, the dictionaries in this case are in a locked down directory. How can we make it work? Well, if you're working individually, independently, you can copy these dictionaries. In this case, they're in a Windows 10 Program Files directory. I could copy them from here and put them in some place under my own user. Or if I'm working with other modelers in the organization, I could copy these dictionaries to a network drive. Any place where we'll have read-write access. So we'll just cancel out of this, and let me cancel out of my attribute editor so I don't save my Irwin Data Modeler. That's how spell checking works. I said it's very adjustable, very customizable. And how do we do that? Well, we find that under the Tools menu. That's our friend for this module. The Tools menu, all the way down at the bottom, Customize Spell Checker. First of all, we'll check the bottom choice, Dictionaries. Here we see a list of words. They are contained in the userdic.tlx dictionary that we were using. We see these others, correct.tlx, tech.tlx, accent.tlx. The add word, delete word, import, export, import lets us bring in a list of words. Export lets us create a list of words. Down at the bottom right, add dictionary. Remember, it has to have that TLX extension. A new dictionary. This is going to create a brand new dictionary, and notice the language choices. Remove dictionary. I'm not going to demonstrate that. I don't want to remove the dictionary. Tremendous control over the dictionaries. And that other choice from Tools, Customize Spell Checker, Options. Now these options will apply to all of our dictionaries. Right now they're set to be case sensitive. They're set to provide typographical suggestions. In other words, the problem that it found with my lowercase ERWIN was it had another instance of the word Irwin in the dictionary already, but it was capitalized. So that would be a typographical suggestion. And autocorrect if it's obvious and available. But look at these other options. Phonetic suggestions, English only. Doubled words, ignore domain names. Ignore words with mixed case. So something like Superbase it would take. Ignore words with numbers, so Win95. Ignore all caps words, such as ASAP. And ignore capitalized words, for example, the name of a country. And the buttons at the bottom. How do I want it to make suggestions? Quickly, fast, but less accurate? Moderately fast and moderately accurate? Or slowly, but much more accurate? Well, we're going to default to moderately fast and accurate. Let's cancel. And that's some of the big universe of the spell checkers. Irwin Data Modeler lets you define and launch a secondary application to run inside Irwin DM through an API. You will use the add-in manager to do this. Irwin Data Modeler does provide you with a number of example add-in applications that you can run inside Irwin. And I thought this was a bit of an interesting place to start, although it's talking about layout, not about the add-in manager, but I think it's an interesting Diagram. Of course, this was laid out using the circular layout button. And if I were to ask you, is there a central issue in this diagram? Wouldn't you say order item? Everything or many things seem to connect to it. We can use a secondary application to perform specific tasks that can't be performed directly in Irwin Data Modeler. For example, Irwin installs an Irwin Spy application as an add-in to Irwin Data Modeler. Irwin Spy lets us view metadata. When you install Irwin DM, you can choose to install the optional Irwin Spy. But if you wish to add them later or add another application, you'll use the Add-in Manager. Where do we find that? Well, of course, in the Tools menu. Tools, Add-ins, Manage. Add-in Manager, menu type, menu item details. We have a little new button here. Add new menu item. Let's try a COM object. And beside COM Prog ID, I'll push the Browse button. Select component for add-in. Irwin 9 Spy add-in. And I don't really want to add this, so I'll just cancel out. But that's how you add things to the add-in menu. I'll try to add in an executable now. Program files, Irwin Data Modeler R9, backup files, samples, Irwin API, irwinspy.net, and we'll look in the bin folder. There's irwinspy.net.x64exe. I can add a menu choice, build a submenu for Irwin Spy, and I might put all of my metadata examining add-ins under that. We also have a delete button in the Add-in Manager, the ability to move things up in the list, move things down in the list. I'm just going to delete the Irwin Spy submenu and cancel out of my Add-in Manager. So we can define an add-in application, we can change an add-in menu item, we can remove an add-in application, and all of that here from the Tools menu under Add-ins. We've seen how to use the Irwin DM Add-in Manager to add in applications. Now we need to see how to access them once they're there. Let me real quick remind you about the Irwin Spy add-in. Now to access that tool, all we need to do is pull down the Tools menu, go to Add-ins, and there we see our new entry, Irwin Spy, on the menu. This is a whole separate application. You can open the Help screen, the Help panel, and leave it open. In the Models menu, we have access to the Irwin Meta Model. From the File menu, we can choose to open a model file. And let's just pick the one that I'm working on here. By double-clicking on the object on the left, we can see a whole list of its properties, a whole grid of its properties here on the right. Lots of metadata. Here's our city domain, all of its properties, and the Help panel down at the bottom. So you can really break into the Irwin model and see what's going on inside the model. And I'll close Irwin Spy. So again, from the Tools menu, Add-ins. If you have added any add-ins, they'll be here in the list. Irwin installs 2 ODBC data sources. Using those and the Query tool, we can query the metadata behind the model. Irwin Data Modeler has an interesting tool called the Query tool. We can enter SQL queries against the model. We wonder, why would we want to be so hardcore about reporting when we have our fancy report designer? Well, the Query tool might be quicker, especially if, number one, you can write SQL queries. Number two, you just want to save the results as a CSV file. These queries can be saved and reused. So once you get the query written so that it works the way you want to, save it, share it, use it again and again on many different models, many different modelers. Let's open the Query tool from the Tools menu. And I'm going to type a very simple query, select star from entity. In the toolbar above, we have a File Open, Open Query button. We have a Save File or Save Query button. We have a Connect to a Database selection. Connect to Irwin ODBC, that's what we want. Click on that one. Cut, copy, paste, this little upside down right turn button, or at least it would be a right turn if it were right side up. We'll execute our query, select star from entity. I misspelled the word select. There we go. Let's try again. Notice we have some obscure column headings. ID at, type at, owner at. But we also have a name column. Keep scrolling to the right. There's a lot of this stuff. Do not generate column. Lots and lots and lots and lots of metadata. But a couple of really interesting columns here are the name of the entities and the definition of the entities. Now I want to change my query. Select name, comma, definition from entity, and I'm going to add an order by. I'm going to order by column 1, the name, since I noticed that the names in a raw report are not sorted. Let's run this and see what we get. Well, that's pretty cool. Now I'd like to try a much fancier query, one where you can really see the value of the query tool. First of all, there's a translate function that knows the meaning of those obscure column headings like ID at and type at and such. Let's incorporate that. And I also want to show the use of the metamodel table AL. This stands for action log. We can report on objects that were created or deleted or modified according to the action log. In other words, the actions that have been taken during this current session. So let's see. Here's a query I proposed for you. Select tran, that's translate, and then in parentheses, type at, close paren, as object, also name and owner path. From AL, that's the action log, dot deleted. Let's execute this query. Nothing yet. So I'm going to save the query. I'm going to save that query in a place that I have access to. Close the query tool. And let's just pick, remember order item. Order item, remember when we had this displayed as a circle in an earlier demonstration? How it really was the center. It kind of shows here in the hierarchical display too. Really is the central issue of the entities in this diagram. So I'll select order item and delete it. Do I want it deleted from the model? Yes. Now my action log shows that I deleted selected objects. Whoa, that's a bunch of things that get deleted. Let me redock the action log and open up my query tool again. Let me go find my query with the open query button. alquery.qry, open. Connect to ODBC and execute against this model. Wow, object is entity. This is the type. Translate type as object. In other words, whatever type at means, it's a number, but whatever it means, translate that, and then display it under the name object, the column header object. Then I want a column labeled name and another column labeled owner path. All that stuff got deleted just because I deleted that one entity. You might want to see this in order by owner path. So I'll add order by 3 and execute again. Now we see an order by owner path. I wanted to really display what owner path meant. So I'll close the query tool. I don't want to save the new query. I just have the old query that I can use. I've created quite a hole in my model just for deleting that one object. Let me undo my deletion. Here's order item. Everything's back to the way it was. So I hope you find that as a useful sample case, the query tool. We have begun to investigate Irwin Data Modeler's use of naming standards. Now we'll see how to control that process. Remember, we also use the Tools menu to control global behaviors of Irwin DM. In previous versions of Irwin Data Modeler, the naming standard editor was a standalone executable. Now the naming standard editor is an Irwin object, and it's accessed from the Model Explorer. The naming standards themselves are Irwin DM model level objects. So here in the Tools menu, Under Standards, let's look at naming standards. Here in the Tools menu, you can create or import naming standards, including the glossary. We're going to use the Naming Standards Option Editor to create a naming standard and develop a glossary of words and abbreviations. Notice the standard guided editor construction. In the toolbar at the top, the far right button allows us to import naming standards model files from earlier releases of Irwin Data Modeler. Let's create a new naming standard in this model with our familiar little New button. We get a default name from Irwin DM, just as we're accustomed to. I want to change that to Publications. This can be a very important item in a data model. We're going to have people running queries against this database who were not part of the development process. So they need to know the proper terminology that's used throughout the database in order to construct queries, and a glossary is an excellent reference for them. Well, as soon as we create a new naming standards file, then at the bottom, let's move down to these tabs. The logical tab and similarly the physical tab are just a place to record our standards of word order and position. How do we want entities named? How do we want attributes named? Let's focus on attribute. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. What does that mean? Well, we can have up to 4 parts in an attribute name. Now, a part could be more than one word. What do we want Part 1 of attribute names to be? Because we have these choices. Prime, modifier 1 or 2, and class. A prime word would probably be a noun. For example, author, book, employee, publisher. A modifier, well, let's skip modifiers for a moment and go to class, because modifiers really apply to the class. Class words allow us to assign a type to this attribute. Is it a label? Is it a name? Is it a number? Is it an ID? So many organizations, most organizations, in fact, whether they employ it here in the naming standard or not, will have a list of 10 to 15, usually, class words. And now let's talk about modifier 1 and modifier 2. Modifiers are adjectives or adverbs that really modify the class word. So for the first word in our attribute naming standard, we're going to want a prime word. Part 2, modifier 1. What's that mean? Well, we have 2 possibilities for using modifiers. Modifier 1, modifier 2. We're just going to allow modifier 1. How do we define that? We'll see in a list later when we create our glossary. And part 3, that'll be a class word. So an example of a prime word could be author, a class word, address, and a modifier, mailing. So author, mailing address would be a valid attribute name according to this naming standard that we're building. Physical is similar, allows up to 4 parts in the names of tables, columns, or domains. The real meat of the naming standard is the glossary, and we can create a new glossary on the Glossary tab. Let's build a new glossary. The word/words column contains a full word or could be several words. Let's try employee. We have an abbreviation column and an alt abbreviation. One way to use that would be to list in the abbreviation column an abbreviation that could be used in an OLTP, a transaction processing system. Alt abbreviation, we might keep that column for recording a little bit longer, more wordy abbreviation, like we might find in an OLAP model, say EMPLY. Those designs are very commonly used by people who are not database experts. So if it's a little bit easier for them to read. Now we have some columns for P, M1, M2, C, prime, modifier 1, modifier 2, and class. Well, employee, what could that be? It certainly could be a prime word. Could it be a modifier? I don't know. It's a little bit of a stretch, but maybe. Then at the rightmost, we have a definition column. This definition is the definition of this word. Definitions are important everywhere. They're very, very important metadata, but they're especially important here because of the wide use that this glossary might have. An employee is a person who, and you might need to be specific. We talk about contract employees. and temporary employees and full-time employees and part-time employees. There are many different business rules that apply to these different types of employees. We need to record that. The organization may already have a glossary built, and that's a good thing. It might not be specific enough for our purposes right here. We'd want to add our terminology, our project terminology, perhaps to the enterprise glossary. And a couple of things we can do to promote that. The rightmost button in this bottom level toolbar, we have a diskette button, if anybody remembers what those look like, that allows us to save a CSV file, comma-separated values. Also, just to the left of that, this is the fourth button from the right, has a little Excel X on it, import from CSV. And notice I get a question. You can choose to merge with your existing list or just to create a brand new list. Wonderful stuff to promote reusability. Next, the definition tab. Definition, I thought we had definitions back in the glossary. Yes, but this definition is a definition of what? Definition of this naming standard. Notes and extended notes about what? About the naming standard. When we apply this naming standard model, Irwin will build the physical side of this combined model using the glossary if we tell it to. So beginning with allowable words, words that appear in a glossary for our attribute names in this case, but also this could apply to entity names and so on, but we're working with attribute names. If we name our attributes according to our naming standard, then when Irwin generates the physical side, it's going to have either our choice of abbreviation or all an abbreviation as part of the physical name. And in fact, something that's not broadly known, we can use the glossary when we're reverse engineering. And we'll cover this in our advanced courses. If you're careful how you do it, you can bring in a script or write from a system catalog, construct a physical model of the words, the names that it finds out there for tables and columns, and have Irwin actually expand from the abbreviation or the alt abbreviation list into the full words on the logical side of the model. Not many Irwin users are aware of that. Okay, let me close this, and let's go take a look at our Model Explorer under Naming Standards. There we go. Publications. It's at work in this model. It is a model level object. It applies throughout the model, not just to one single subject area or one single diagram, but to the whole model. Naming standards. Tools. It's quite a menu, isn't it? Tremendous choices here to control debugging, standardization, and enhancements for our models. In this course, we've gone way beyond boxes and lines. Surely we see that an Irwin data model is far more than that. However, we've also elevated our diagrams to make them easier and quicker to grasp.